cyclical wisdom is about allowing ourselves to also decay and descend. The womb has been my first teacher to listen to the cycles that are in my body and then become familiar with the circadian rhythms and digestion and all these other ways and cycles that live in our bodies. And then that has bloomed outwards into becoming aware of the cycle of the year and the cycle of the seed and the cycle of water and the cycle of rock and the cycle of soil.
Welcome, dear souls, to a new episode. For those of you that are members of All That We Are or would like to join, we have our next Soul Space on November the 22nd. You can find out how to join at allthatweare.org/support. I know that this is a challenging time, and so many of you are feeling weary and dysregulated, and that so many of you are showing up with full presence, organizing, sending SIM cards to help people in Gaza stay connected, protesting, signing petitions, donating, lobbying your politicians, raising awareness, and learning about more conflicts and violence around the world that you might not have realized was happening, from the Congo to Sudan to Azerbaijan, and how they are funded. And through this, understanding deeper the ways in which we still live within the colonial paradigm, and with this gateway opening, the possibility to dismantle it. I know that this issue of collective liberation has brought up so much for so many, and that you may have had some really challenging encounters over the deep issues within humanity that this triggers. One thing in particular is the intellectual wars, calling out people's care and labeling it as virtue signaling, for example. If you are moved to show up and do something, please don't be silenced by these intellectual put-downs. Nobody knows your true motivation and your true integrity apart from your own heart. I myself was recording a podcast this week which had to be abandoned as it was unearthing so many of the classic unconscious systems of oppression and how they play out in power dynamics, and it didn't appear to be something that would be that beneficial for those listening. This appears to be a moment where we can choose truth, justice, liberation, and human rights for all, where we can show up with empathy and acknowledge that in violence there are no winners. It's a complex process and it's not an overnight one. So much has changed in our world. Things that were legal and acceptable that no longer are, such as outright slavery, the ownership of people, which was normal until it wasn't. A deep change isn't going to be quick and easy, and yet it's part of the work to hold the belief in its possibility. There is so much I have witnessed in these past weeks that is heartwarming. Humans of all kinds of religions and nationalities coming together for peace, for a different way of relating to the issue and a different way of relating to each other. People keeping their hearts open whilst witnessing the collective shadow of humanity. This takes great emotional and spiritual maturity. Keep your hearts open. Know that they can strengthen from break as they break even deeper open. And that with each crack, you will know even deeper who you are. For this week, my guest is Alana Bloom, a facilitator, artist, and activist, stewarding eco-centric and animist ways of being that bring us back into connection with the natural world, each other, and our deepest nature. Her work is focused on regeneration and cultural change through personal and collective healing, centered in our relationship with the earth. She has been guiding transformational experiences for people to explore unleashing their true wild self for several years, working with hundreds of people and a variety of organizations on the frontiers of personal and planetary healing. Passionate about the Eight Shields map and nature connection, she has studied and worked with a range of practitioners from the UK's Nature Culture Network and Animist Valley. She has spent a number of years working in the fields of peer-led learning, community building, grief tending, and ecosystem restoration. She guides with a playful yet deep and authentic spirit, seeded from her background in physical theatre, circus, and dance, with embodiment, ritual, creativity, and nature connection as foundational to the way she facilitates. Co-founder of True Nature, a platform for women's empowerment, she regularly hosts retreats on Dartmoor. She is also co-director of the Livings Project, supporting community and land regeneration initiatives, as well as community building as the membership manager for Earth. You can find her roaming the wilds of Dartmoor, where she lives in Devon, part of the UK, or singing, dancing, and writing poetry. As well as being part of the Devon community together, we are also both in the Design Science Studio, which is inspired by the work of Buckminster Fuller. In this episode, entitled Wisdom Cycles, we explore the themes of growing food, animism, and cyclical living as we explore the question, how do we cultivate our relationship with nature? We hope that this conversation connects you deeper with your nature and the nature of which you are a part of. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible.
Alana, it is a great joy to welcome you to All That We Are. Thank you for coming and sharing with us. Such a pleasure. And thank you for hosting us here in your space by your altar and all of these beautiful aspects of your journey and your guidance that we're surrounded by as we sit together here in the flesh, having this conversation. What are the futures of your wildest dreams? Ooh, what a question to start with. The future of my wildest dreams is one where land and people are healing together, thinking really about ecology and ecosystems and the wholeness of our ecosystems and how they are a reflection of the wholeness of the humans that inhabit them. If I really let my imagination run wild, I see people gathering in ceremony and ritual to honor the cycles of life, to honor the rites of passage that we all travel through. That future is one that is like interconnected, intergenerational, that is weaving ourselves back into the belonging and web of the more than human world. How is that vision already part of your life? I think it's how I'm trying to live my life, and how I'm trying to move through the world, in a way that I live with that understanding that I belong to this more than human web, that it's a part of me, I'm part of it. Like if I think about the bacteria in my gut and the water in my body, and that the water in my body comes from the ecosystem and the river that I am a part of, and I'm really trying to live that on a deep personal level in the way that I walk through my life, that I see myself as, or that I see the alive world around me as like my kin, my friends, my family, the ones that are like rooting for me and that I go to when I'm having a hard day. And there is a ewe that's just up the road in a churchyard that I was having a difficult time a couple of weeks ago, and went and was just held by this yew tree, and it really felt like to see these beings as like people with culture, not just inanimate or just trees, but like this being that can really hold me and hold my grief and hold my sad day. So there's that on the kind of personal level, and then on a more the spaces that I'm holding, I'm always trying to like orientate people back to this feeling of like we don't exist as an individual, like that we are part of it, whether we realize it or not, that we are part of a web. I'm really thinking about the gut at the moment, just because I've been reading a little bit about it. And, when we're born, we get covered in bacteria that we inherit from our family. That is like a really great reminder of like, we're not just this body that is ours, but actually like we're passed on the bacteria from our family. So yeah, I'm always trying to like orientate towards that of like, yeah, we are part of something that's really mysterious and wild. It's not just I, myself, it's I and we and us and kin, and yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about the bacteria and what you mean?
Yeah. Well, basically, when we're born, in our gut, we have thousands of bacteria that pass information and nutrients. Like, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know the nitty-gritty details. And yeah, we have this bacteria in our gut that's basically helping our brain chemistry, helping our hormones. Like, so much happens in our digestive system that influences who we are, how we act in the world, what our personality is like to some degree. And so the bacteria in our gut, they don't just appear there. They are passed from, when you are exiting your mother's womb, all the bacteria there are being passed into your own microbiome that becomes part of the bacteria in your gut. So it's like, and that influences, your personality and who you are. So it's like they're passed through from generations previously. If you think about your parents, they would have inherited it from their parents, and their parents would have inherited it from their parents. And like, that's a very real, tangible way of how like we are an embodiment of our ancestors, and we are an embodiment of like this lineage, this web that is just so much more than me and I and this body.
And I love that as you're talking about that, I'm seeing how their bacteria is shaped by all of the places that they've been and the people that they've seen or been intimate with, and the lands that they've walked on and the food that they've eaten. And then you can really just see how this web this web is created, and how vast it is, and how we have all of that, and we're also sharing all of that with those that are close in our lives.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling when you start to think about how really interconnected we are on some very tangible levels.
When you were talking about the yew tree, and you said the phrase that they're rooting for me. And one of the things that I have, I'm always so aware of is how violent and colonial a lot of our phrases are, and how a lot of the phrases that we just, we've just been taught in day-to-day life, divide and conquer, these kind of things are all like actually really violent. And then just this notion of the rootedness being support, and how not only is that support what like connects us underground and holds us up from the earth and in deep connection to the earth, but that like it also then comes into this cheerleading that is around celebrating aliveness.
Yeah, it's like I have this feeling that the earth, the beings, they really want us to become all that we are. They really want that. Like, they are longing for that, just as we are longing for that. Yeah, my experiences of spending a lot of time in the natural world is like when I see the mirrors that confirm that to me, and confirm that like, yeah, the granite wants me to feel grounded and in my wholeness and in my truth and in my power. And the crow or the woodpecker is like calling for me to use my voice, and is like asking for me to speak what needs to be spoken. So yeah, I really feel that they're really there. They're celebrating us, they're rooting for us.
One of the blind spots that often is there for people that really care about our future is our relationship with food, and in particular with growing. And I know that's one of the
the main reasons that Earth has been created, which you are part of the team there. I know that this journey around food and relating back to the bacteria and the microbiome and everything that we know about pesticides and how much that's infiltrated our world and is affecting our health, that this journey of actually being a grower and being connected to your food is something that you've really been on. And I remember a couple of years ago now coming to visit you at Pondfield, and whilst you were tending to the vegetables. Can you share around that journey of really connecting to food?
Yeah, I like, just as you're asking that question, I can feel like this huge smile coming to my face because it's been such a beautiful journey that's like still unfolding. What I will just start with is my full name is Alana Hyde Bloom, and over the past couple of years I've discovered that Hyde, Hyde, is about the size of land that would have been needed to sustain a family, which is around 4 acres. That historically, that's kind of like the amount of space you would have needed. And Pondfield, which is the place that we've both met on, is 4 acres. So I just feel like to bring that in, that there's something in my talking about ancestry, it's like there's something in my heritage that has sort of like led me towards land and led me towards growing and regenerating. And
bloom always brings the kind of the flowers, like the blooming, and that's actually not a spiritual name that you take on.
No, that's inherited. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like both of my second names are to do with like food and growing and plant life. So, but yeah, I mean, I got involved with Pondfield in like 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and me and my partner were living in his 1-bedroom flat and had no outdoor space. And my friend Charlie said, come along to Pondfield and, get involved. And it saved me. It saved us in that time because we were volunteering and we were stewarding the land, and because it was outside, we were able to gather. And I learned so much in that first year. I remember the feeling of digging up potatoes for the first time and literally feeling like I'd found gold in the ground. My heritage, on my mother's side, heritage is, my mum's Irish, so potatoes are like a huge aspect of that, of Irish history and the famine. So yeah, finding these potatoes in the ground was like, it felt real, like full circle, and connecting with like the way that so many people before me have like grown food and like dug up potatoes and found this like gold in the ground. And yeah, that the journey of growing food at Pondfield, like I'm by no means like an expert or like know exactly what I'm doing all the time, but it's been very intuitive. And through like learning, listening, exchanging with the other people and the other people that tend to Pondfield, I feel like I've like now I'm growing food in my own back garden, and that's like it feels more intimate somehow, because it's literally like my partner's not really doing it, it's just me. And I feel very responsible for the things that I'm growing and looking after them and seeing how they change through the different seasons. So, but all that to say, I think it's a very empowering experience to grow your own food, because you know exactly where it comes from. You have seen that kale plant, from seed to like plate. I've been in Earth, I've been working on a course around localization and how like when we shorten the distance between where our food comes from and the relationship with our food, we create this more interconnected culture that, I'm talking about. It's so that feels like a real part of it. And it doesn't just go to growing our own vegetables, it also is around like wild food in general as well.
What do you want to say to anyone listening that is feeling really intimidated about growing food? It's really interesting how it's been such a kind of cultural like disassociation that's happened. And when I think about, how Hollywood and like TV culture that then like kind of infiltrated the world in our lifetimes, is there's always a lot of jokes about like not being able to keep a houseplant alive, and that almost being like a symbol of coolness because it means that you're just too busy being urban. and you know, there is this real disassociation with food, and I feel like a lot of people find it really overwhelming, the idea of growing food, even the idea of cooking all their own food. And I wonder what it is that you want to say about how to get started and how to overcome like any of that fear or like overwhelm, all of the things that you might need to know and all of the things that you need to tend to, and what can you share?
I feel like growing food is about building a relationship, and so you can't really get it wrong in that sense, because a relationship has good days and bad days. Like, we have fights with our partner, we have like moments of ecstasy and beauty, but it's all part of the relationship, and it's what makes it so fulfilling. So, you know, I feel like growing food is you're beginning to build a relationship with your food. And it's okay if I don't even know if there's a way of like getting it wrong, because it's all, you're just supporting life to do its thing. You know, I'm thinking about my kale because I've got kale in my garden, but like if that kale plant doesn't want to, you know, doesn't have the right conditions to thrive in that moment, you know, that's a rule of life in that moment. It's not, it needs more water, it needs more sunlight. So like learning from the cycle of life and decay, like being open to learning from that cycle and not worrying if like plants die and that they return to the soil, they return back into the cycle. It's not like that plant dies and it's gone forever. It's like, no, it becomes nutrients, it seeds the new generation of kale plants. So yeah, my advice or hope is to just that people feel open to the relationship and actually tuning in with like the undercurrents of that relationship and not worrying about like, you know, whether the plant does well or not. Like, you know, if you really want to be like a grower and you want to like get really good at like growing food, then like sure, look at all the details and learn what you can about like perfecting the perfect tomato. But if it's actually, we bring it back to like cultivating a relationship with our food, where our food comes from, then like start anywhere, and just be attentive to the relationship and see what happens and see where you're drawn to. Maybe you're drawn to flowers rather than food. Maybe you're drawn to herbs. Maybe you're drawn to wild food. Maybe it's not just about growing food to develop a relationship with your food. There's like so many other ways that we can do that.
And wild food is easy.
Yeah.
It grows itself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I have a whole relationship with wild food, and yeah, I think wild food is really something that like once you start building a relationship with it, you can really understand and sort of like tune into the ecosystem and the bioregion and the places that you're from, when you're seeing how it changes through the seasons and seeing like what wild food is available at different times of the year.
I saw like a meme about parenthood that was like, you know, let's raise children that know more names of plants than they do of celebrities or brands. And we know that's not really the case, and that kids can, like on the whole in the Western world, identify more brands than they can plants. My nieces know all the plants, and I'm like completely fascinated, and they find it so boring. I'm like, you know, they're like, there's a, they just like, they really know. It makes me wonder when I was separated from that, like in my ancestry, and at what place did that relationship of always knowing what was around and what was available, what food could grow, to not knowing, like when did that happen and why did that happen? And I don't know the particular story in my own life, but I know that when my mum came to England in the early 70s, she had later on her first garden, and one of her friends, they'd gone to a garden centre, and her friend's daughter said, "That's a busy Lizzie. Do you not even know what a busy Lizzie is?" And it's one of these really beautiful things, because then my mum created beautiful gardens, and I grew up with beautiful gardens that I didn't really spend a lot of time with learning what everything was, and remember actually that the the watering the garden in the summer holidays was like, it wasn't a joy, it was a chore.
Yeah.
And that's so strange to me that now with the relationship that I have to nature, that I wouldn't have seen like tending to these herbs and flowers as being like a really beautiful thing to do with my time in the summer holidays.
Yeah, right.
But at the time, I think I just wanted to watch Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
And so I share that because I feel like something has really happened to so many of us that has like disconnected us. And sometimes we have these conversations about nature connection in the way of like the magic of how it feels to like be connected. But I feel like also recognizing the places where it's been severed, as well as the places where it's been reignited or rekindled.
Totally. Oh my God, yes. Thank you for bringing that in. Like I grew up in Bristol in the UK and was totally not a nature baby in any way, shape or form. Like, to be fair, I would climb up an apple tree and I was a bit of a tomboy, but like similarly, it wasn't something that I thought of as a joy to like get in the garden and, you know, plant foods, and my parents were not green-fingered whatsoever. I'm thinking about like, what is the thing that has created this separation, like especially as we've like modernized and continued to modernize, because I don't feel like it was necessarily the case in my grandparents' generation, like especially around the war in the UK. Like the experience of the war actually got people engaged with growing food, and like, you know, there was like dig for victory and all of that. But then if we trace it further back, I'm thinking about enclosure, and actually like, was this the root of when separation from land and from our relationship with land began? Because prior to the enclosures, not just in the UK, but in many places across Europe and the world, like people did live from what they grew. They had a very tangible relationship with the place that they lived, and survived from what they could grow and what they could share and exchange with other people. And it was, I don't want to just kind of like romanticize that, because there's obviously hardships, different hardships at different times of our history. But when enclosures began, this journey that we're still on, in terms of our separation from the natural world. Yeah, I guess like for me, the like rediscovering my relationship with nature and soil and muck and growing food has been about becoming kind of more rooted and grounded, and trying to find a way to live in right relationship with the planet and with the earth. And you've got to meet people where they're at, and not everybody's there yet. We are living in an age of technology and social media and distraction and the attention economy. And so, yeah, I think it can be a slow unfolding. And also when people return to nature, it's also that they're meeting a longing that is alive in them. And that longing may unfold through growing food or through foraging, but it might unfold in a variety of other ways, because I don't think there's a way to dictate what nature connection looks like. It is, again, about this reciprocal relationship and seeing the relationship as something that you tend to and you feed. And you may do that in the middle of London, the middle of a city, just by going to the park and listening to the birds. Like that might be the way that you feed the longing for this reconnection and like returning to not being separate, but being interconnected.
Absolutely. There's always a balance and a dance between the different aspects. I actually did grow up in nature. I grew up in Derbyshire on the edge of the Peak District. My best friend Alexa grew up on a farm. So I spent most of my childhood like on her farm. My school had like fields and cornfields and trees and around, you know, a lot of my childhood was running around in trees and mud pies and helping to deliver baby lambs.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And being surrounded by lots of different trees. And yet, funnily enough, I kind of remember more like watching TV. Because I remember that I had such a desire to get to the urban, like, and that part of, you know, I was waiting till I was old enough to move to London, and that a lot of my life in my 20s in London was actually really about not being connected to the land or to nature or to plants or anything, and being connected to systems and people and excitement and those kind of things. And I feel that some of that was also to do with, as we talk about ancestral patterns and ancestral trauma, that I don't know in detail, and others will, like when people's relationship with the land in India changed. But what I do know is that one of the things that I grew up with was a notion of class being associated with the color of your skin, which was associated with how much time you were outside, and the idea that if you were then outside on the land, you would become darker. And so actually it was about being inside, and that there was just more value given to jobs that were inside based. And that conditioning would have trickled down to me, and that would have also spurred this London, I want to go to London energy. And so it's really interesting to kind of unpack why we value what we value, and then finding myself on a journey of moving back to the countryside
Right.
and wanting to be back with all of my plant friends.
Do you feel like when you were a child or when you were younger, if there had have been more like infrastructure and culture within a rural environment, do you think that would have changed how you thought about the city? If there had been more kind of things available, especially for young people to do within a rural environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Where I was, there wasn't really much that I remember, or that was on my radar. So the focus really was on drinking and shopping as the two main activities of kind of teenagerness.
The reason I ask is because the Living Projects, who are the organisation behind Pondfield, this is something that we've really been trying to address through the work that we do on these 4 acres, because there is the like rural to city, rural to urban pipeline, where a lot of people leave rural environments to move to cities because that's where the culture is, that is where the jobs are, that's where there is the excitement and hubbub and possibility and opportunity. And so something we've been trying to do is, how do we create more of that culture and opportunities in a rural environment beyond just like going to the pub and drinking, which seems to be the case for a lot of young people in rural environments, but actually to provide the other opportunities that are nourishing and actually help young people to develop the skills that they want to develop and explore who they are without feeling like they have to go to a city in order to do that. So it's something that, just hearing it in your story, like I imagine there's so many people with stories similar to that of growing up in a rural environment in some ways was very boring or, unfulfilling, and that if there was more ways to support, to create culture, to create ways of coming together, like would we still feel that about having to move to the city to meet those needs?
I'm curious to know how like kids growing up in Totnes, for example, where we are in South Devon, and this community where it's become a place that so many people have come like from London because they want to live a more connected life, and actually because of the way that cost of living has also changed in the cities. I'd be curious to know what happens to that generation, and if they are all like desperate to get to the big cities, or if this kind of movement of people in the UK that have come from London to other towns, there's this sort of culture that the locals find quite intense, the down from Londoners, the DFLs. I'm curious to see how that like manifests over time in the culture that it creates, and if it does bring more of those opportunities of that vibrancy and that diversity and that dynamicness alongside deep relationship with nature.
Yeah. The Pondfield was very much started by Charlie Bells, who grew up in the area before it was kind of like cool, or before any, for him, there was just so few opportunities. And I do think in, where I live in Devon, there is a lot more opportunities than there ever were. And I do think that is partly because of there's the local school Schumacher, which brings in a lot of people from all over the world who bring ideas, and it creates that diversity of like experience and therefore responses to a variety of problems. So I feel like for people living in this local area 10 years ago, there was very little, and it's changed a lot. And there is something to be attentive to, which is like local people who've lived here for a long time, and those of us who are moving from other cities, myself included. How do we cultivate a deep relationship with the place and the people and the existing culture, and not impose our ideas on what is fun or exciting, but actually build culture and opportunities with people who live in a local area? Because, for instance, one way that that's not being done, that Totnes High Street has become more and more expensive. There's a lot of shops opening there that most local people can't afford, and that's great that there's this diversity happening, but also we need to make sure that we're actually working with historical local people, that they are brought, that we're moving with them, we're not moving and leaving them behind.
Absolutely. And it touches on one of the big questions of our time, which is, how do we all live together in all of our differences? And what is relationship to land and place and culture and, dare I say, religion, and how do we honor that and each other? I was actually this morning just reflecting on like how much I've been shaped, my spirituality has been shaped from life in England and going to Christian school and paganism and priestess and kind of connecting to the sacred practices of this land, and how that interrelates with like my ancestral religious culture of both Hinduism and Jainism, and how shaped we are by everything that we experience and all the places that we go and what we are, and that is, both of those in my case are completely like valid and part of me. In whatever scale like this happens, whether it's being completely displaced as a refugee and finding yourself in a new land, or whether it's moving from the nearest city to a rural place, half an hour, but with a different culture and way of being, that this whole relationship of who claims place, what is a place, what is that relationship, that's something that we're being really asked to redefine. And that perhaps some of that comes from being in relationship with the rivers and the trees and the birds and the plants and the food that we grow, because that's the thing that is present to whatever space people find themselves in.
Yeah, right. I'm thinking if I was to somehow end up on the other side of the world, it would be a completely new experience. I've never actually traveled beyond Europe, so I often think about what would it be like to be somewhere like Mexico or Costa Rica or in America. Or what I often think about is what would help me orientate to a new environment, a new place. And it would be, who is this tree? Like, who is this new being? Who is this mountain or canyon or river? And like, how do they, in some ways, like have the authority to welcome me more so than a human culture? Like, I think there can be a lot of difficulty between human cultures, but I don't think nature discriminates in that way. And actually it's like the place, you can develop the sensitivity to listen to what the place is trying to tell you. How does it speak differently? How does it move differently? Like, what is the quality of the wind? What is the quality of the water? How is that different? And to, the places that we come from, how would we also like imbue that place through, our body being in that environment, through the cycles of digestion and water and sweat, and it's like we can merge and become part of the landscape. I don't have the experience of being displaced, so I'm very much talking from an idea and my imagination, and also the experience of moving from a city into a rural environment and what has helped me really root and ground here. But I feel that the land wants to welcome us. It sees us as part of it, regardless of our gender or race or class. It really does want to welcome us. It doesn't see that. It sees us as a child of the earth. That can be quite activating to hear for some people, but if I really tune into my heart, that's what feels true.
Like just hearing you say the words child of the earth. I was doing an initiation in the White Spring last week, and a song kind of came through, and the lyrics of the song were like, come to me, kind of in that kind of like hugging embrace of the mother, a sweet child of earth. And I feel like because we're having this conversation whilst this conflict is happening in the Middle East, and that is land that I've traveled to. I've been to Israel and to the West Bank. I have nothing intelligent to say in this moment around the people culture part of it, but one of the things that has been coming up for me as I sit with it is the olive trees, and feeling the olive trees, and also wondering about all of the animals and the actual land itself. Yeah, what would it be to live in a way where we connect to land not as ownership, but as that aliveness of those beings in a bigger global way, as well as in the relating to our everyday, or like our connection with nature in the personal soul, more than human sense. But if we were able to relate to it in a wider, bigger political sense.
Yeah, when I tune into what's happening, there's just so much grief there. I guess to sort of link it back into, the journey of nature connection and reconnecting with the land. A lot of my work has been around the cycles that we go through and the qualities and attributes that are associated with each point on the cycle, whether that's the wheel of the year or the human life cycle or the cycle of a seed. It's like there are these qualities. We've just passed Samhain, which is the 1st of November, and a lot of people will know as Halloween. This is a real time for honouring and looking back. And I actually think grieving, it's a space for grieving and letting our grief flow as a way to express the depth of our love. When I connect with what's happening in Israel and Palestine, what first happens is feeling the grief. And so the thing that I have been in just the past couple of weeks is really letting that grief flow. And like moments it's, utter numbness and apathy. But when the moments of cracking open happen, it's like I drop into my love for humans as well as this earth. And that love is the thing that wants to spur me into action. And so, yeah, I think I say we, those of us in the West, we're not so good at doing grief. And I think this is an important part of this beautiful future that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. Like we have to find ways to apprentice to grief and to death and to dying and decay, to understand the preciousness of life and blooming and, the sun and the light. We need to understand the darkness as well. Know that they're both sides of the coin.
And how do we understand through cycles the light and the darkness? I really struggle with this kind of spiritual notion of the light. I mean, I know that we are light beings and we have energetic light, but I find there's so much richness in the darkness. So much of the most potency comes out of that in my own experience of life. And in what I've seen in others, if we're able to actually allow ourselves to go into those spaces and to experience those aspects of ourselves, not as bad, not as something that needs to be fixed or needs to be immediately kind of brought back into something else, I feel like so much more becomes possible. Can you share how you experience the cycles and how you feel we can all be more in tune with these rhythms?
As a woman and a person with a womb, I have this cycle that I travel through every single month that is a great map that has supported me to deepen into these other cycles that exist. And I think that was the first thing that I became familiar with, tracking these 28, 30 days each month that I shift and change and transform and am rebirthed anew. The womb has been my first teacher to listen to the cycles that are in my body and then become familiar with the circadian rhythms and digestion and all these other ways and cycles that live in our bodies. And then that has like bloomed outwards into becoming aware of the cycle of the year and the cycle of the seed and the cycle of water and the cycle of rock and the cycle of soil. And like what I feel in the West in kind of consumerist capitalist culture is that we value just this like perpetual summer aspect of the cycle, the like the peak, the not even the bud but the bloom. Cyclical wisdom is about allowing ourselves to also decay and descend. You know, I'm thinking about the wheel of the year. I wish I could kind of like visualize it for you, but or like show you a map, but like the bottom half of the cycle is kind of what I would suggest we associate with like the light and this kind of like up and out and into spirit, whereas like the other side of the cycle, the kind of from about this time to like spring, is like the descending, is the dark, is the deep. And yeah, we need both. We need this descending action as well as this, like, if we're just in the light, we're coming out of the body and into the cosmos, but actually we are bodies. And so when we descend into the ground and into the fecundity of the soil, we're also descending into our bodies and into the earth and allowing the wisdom that exists there to speak through us.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
What do you feel is possible if more of us attune to the cycles of our body and the cycles of the year and the cycles of the seasons and the cycles of our lives?
This sense of wholeness, like right now, so much is fractured. And if we were to really live in accordance with this rhythm of life, then there would be more intergenerational spaces and more spaces and ceremonies for grief and death. You know, moments that mark these transitions in our lives, you know, whether that's becoming a parent or a new job or becoming an elder. It's like, I often feel like we've forgotten how to honor the times of our life and to really be with how we shift and transform through these different phases. So I often think cyclical intelligence is about seeing how we aren't static. You know, we don't stay young. And with each stage of our life, there's new things that emerge, new parts of us that we become familiar with, and that those parts carry much needed tools and tricks that are necessary for these times. So on a very simple level, being able to, well, for me, trying to stay connected to the rhythm of the year and honor the wheel of the year and the 8 different points of the year is definitely a way that I am able to see how I change over time and what is no longer relevant, what is dying, what parts of me are integrated, what parts of me have become, you know, are blooming, what parts of me. And therefore, I feel like that also helps me to be in a deeper level of service to balance the kind of inner reflection and like outer action.
There's something about also really recognizing what parts are shedding, recognizing and honoring that we don't stay the same. As you said, we grow, and we grow in so many ways. age being one of them, but also just in our beliefs and our values. And I find it can be really helpful to also acknowledge like what has gone. Some of those things are great. You're like, oh yay, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I'm not responding to people in that way anymore. Like, that pattern of my ego seems to have now dissolved, or I've healed this particular thing that was showing up in all of my relationships, or I'm actually just not interested in that anymore. And I'm suddenly finding that my energy is wanting to go somewhere else. And sometimes it's in between. It's like, it's not wanting to go there, but where is it wanting to go? And that's when I find that rituals can be really, really helpful to tend to those spaces in between, and to honor the letting go and honor like the opening to the new.
Yeah, ritual and ceremony is such an incredible, I say technology, but it's like an ancient technology, and it's existed on this planet since, for a very long time. Yeah, I find ritual is such also, for me, I love this idea of shedding, but I think for me it's been much more about the parts that I've exiled, that I've now like welcomed home. Even the parts of me that I find frustrating and like difficult and like, oh, I wish I would, this wasn't me. Like, trying to be through ritual and through ceremony, like actually finding a way to welcome those parts as well. I said on a call that I was part of yesterday, someone was asking a question around like, how do you reconcile with the difference, like, the way that some people are focused on money and power and extraction, and how, as someone who is conscious of how that is hurting people and planet, how do you reconcile with those two things? Something that came to mind was that all of those people, all of those archetypes, the dictator, the extractor, the patriarch, they to some degree exist within us. They're like part of, they also have a place at the table within me, within my psyche. That's been something very revealing through ritual and ceremony, to be like, what I reject is also lives within me to some degree, and that I have to be attentive to that and understand that the system out there, it's in here too. And so as I undo and work with my internal system, can that be a reflection for the external systems around us as well?
Yeah, beautiful. I love that, when you listen to a myth, you're every character, and we always want to be the hero. But like you're also the gremlin that did the bad magic, and I feel like sometimes it is about integrating in, calling inwards the things that we've exiled. In the energy work that I do, I used to say, now we're releasing, like with a trauma pattern, and then at some point I just realized that it needed to be like that we're integrating, and sometimes we also shed. And I feel like I'm in like a life transition moment. And so it's not that things have been exiled. It's just literally like, I just like literally see myself like stepping into a new body almost, like with taking my body with me. But like, there's a bit of it that just sort of like, is released to the earth and composts there and doesn't want to come with me on the next part of the journey. And it's really beautiful. It's not like a casting out. It's just that saying, okay, we're done here. And that happens too. And it's one of the reasons to really get to know yourself, because then you know the difference between what's ready to leave you and what you're casting out because you don't want to see it.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's such an attentive, it's so subtle as well. Like, I think it's an art to be able to actually tune into what is it, which one is it.
Definitely not an art that I practice every day.
Neither. Me neither.
But there are clear moments.
Yeah, clear moments of clarity. I love this thing about the ego and the gremlin. Like, I often think, in imaginary kind of like dream work stuff that I've done, like I will be visited by like this beautiful wolf, this like powerful creature, and I sometimes have to attune to whether, is that my ego talking? Like, my ego wants me to be the like beautiful like lion wolf, but actually like I'm a terrapin or a turtle or just like I'm a worm, you know, like we often like attribute parts of ourselves to like beauty, but also to like know that like the worm is also there as well. the slug, the bacteria, that can be there too.
And the worm's feeding the bird, and it's all part of the cycle, and it's necessary. And so seeing ourselves also in these other roles that are so much an important part of the system, but they're not the shiniest, grandest.
It's like they've all got their ecological niche where they do shine. Like the worm does shine in its incredible function of like creating soil. And so does, you know, I just think about that, like the ecological niche of each being is where they really shine, but they might not be considered like beautiful in like anthropomorphic perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely felt more of a worm the last few years. And if you'd asked me like 5 years ago, I'd be like, I'm a lioness. Now I'm like, yeah, worm. And there'll be something else. And everything and all that we are. You do these beautiful retreats with Gaia Harvey Jackson, who's shared on this podcast. In the recent one about the creative residency that we shared together. In these retreats, they're based on connecting to nature as well as the empowerment of the women that come. And Gaia have like been on a real journey with your own relationship together in order to be able to hold that space. And I wonder if you would share a little bit about that. We don't need to know details, but in leadership with really beautiful projects, what I have witnessed time and time again in my own life, in projects that I've tried to collaborate on, in projects of friends and really amazing world-changing businesses that are connecting to the, you know, to all these beautiful things, the earth, and trying to make the world more beautiful. The personal dynamics again and again end up like eroding what people are trying to do. And I would love for you to share how, as leaders, you and Gaia have stepped into something to try and tend to that.
Yeah, oof. That's one hell of a question and statement. I mean, you know, I think what I just said about like the system lives within us, so of course we act out the system in our relationships. For me and Gaia, it's been such a beautiful journey, and I'm really gifted that I have such a deep friendship and working relationship with her. We're guiding spaces for women, and I think one of the things that has often come up in our spaces is around kind of like the sister wound, the competition between women that patriarchal structures have, put women against each other. So it's very hard to, you know, something we're trying to do is like, how do we uplift each other without making ourselves smaller? How do I uplift you in everything that you are, and also uplift myself and not make myself less than? As this is something we've seen in the work that we do. It is something that showed up in our relationship, and it felt like if we were to be truly in integrity with the work that we're doing and the spaces that we're holding, that we have to turn towards that and look at those dynamics. And we've been very gifted to work with a woman for, you know, we've both been working with her individually and in our romantic relationships, and then also to work with her together. And her name is Elle Rosenthal, and she's so fantastic at like picking out where we go in our relational dynamics, like how we make ourselves better than or less than, or how we shut ourselves off from connection, or how we become, you know, grabby or like demanding, or, you know, all the different dynamics that can show up. And
disassociate.
Exactly. Yeah. We went through a process with her, and, you know, it's still active. We're still going through it because our relationship is constantly evolving and changing, and new parts of us emerging and new dynamics. But I think holding the space for being really true and honest and looking at the muck of our friendship and our relationship has provided so much utility in what we do and depth in our friendship. I feel like I can go to Gaia and literally tell her anything about my life, and I know that there will be compassion and truth and honesty, and that feels like a really rich foundation to be working with and to be creating from, to have that level of depth and honesty. Also to be able to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, or I was really hurt when you did that. Like, to have the skill to be able to navigate conflict, because it's part of life and it's not going anywhere. Conflict is not going anywhere. Newsflash.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like it's an important reminder of how we tend to our human relationships and the importance of doing that, as you both said, with your partners, as well as like with your working partners, and I feel like that is part of how we create the change. And when we open ourselves up to be able to go and have a conversation with a tree, it's amazing. And the tree hardly ever says, well, actually, you did this. So there's kind of going and having that support of nature and the wild acceptance of nature and what happens in our bodies and minds and souls when we spend time in the outdoors, which isn't always easy as well. We have the elements and in all of their wild ways, and the unknown aspects, so many other aspects. It's not like it's always just like lying in a sunny meadow with nothing biting you.
No, we have to contend with ticks now.
But being able to really cultivate these amazing relationships with all of our kin.
Yeah, it's like the inner and outer action. What is the inner work that needs to be done? And therefore, how does it spark outer action? I feel like that's something that the relationship with Gaia and our work together has really helped reveal to me. Like, to have to balance the inner and outer. It can't all be inner, because then nothing happens. But when you're really working with your inner realms and subconscious and muck and all of that, then how does that also feed what the outer action is in the world?
How does your relationship with yourself and the relationship that you're cultivating with nature, how has that changed you, and how do you see it impact the people that come on your retreats, or the people that you work with on different projects, or people that come to Pondfield? What are you seeing in what that transformation brings?
So I feel like I can't answer this without talking, just like mentioning that, like, before I sort of became very like focused on nature connection and ritual and holding spaces, I was an artist and a performer and this creative wild thing that was not very rooted but very creative in that non-rootedness. And what I felt happened in this journey of being reclaimed by land and earth and more than humans, like, I really feel like it was Dartmoor that started the love affair. It wasn't, I wasn't aware of it. I feel like I was being courted, and that led me down to live in Dartmoor. And, you know, it's a long story, but I felt like that relationship, that courting, supported me to become more rooted and to balance that wild, creative energy. That's the only way I can describe it. Like, how to focus it in a way that feeds me, feeds the earth, and is in service. I feel like that's what these times are really calling for, is like to get really clear on how do we show up in the best way that we can for these times, with like all of our resilience and all of our facets of self online and available. So how I feel it's influenced the spaces that I hold and the people that I work with is that I am being that in myself. I'm trying to be my whole self, and to know that my value is in that being, not necessarily just in the doing. It's how I'm showing up. And from that place of how I'm showing up, like, my longing is that it gives other people permission to show up as their whole selves in who they are, with that authenticity, and to know that all of them is needed and all of them is welcome. Of course, all of us is not necessarily easy. It can be difficult, and there's interpersonal dynamics, and there's ways that we're, stuck or feeling like contracted, but like trusting that those places are also needed in some way. So I feel like that's very much how it's affected me. And then I feel like that's the thing that I'm rippling out. I'm hoping that I'm rippling out is like, we need all of us, all that we are.
What's your call to action that you want to leave us with? And you can have an inner one as well as like a kind of out in the world or supporting an organization one too.
Mm-hmm. My call to action is for people to cultivate this relationship with land, with earth, with more than humans, and to trust those relationships as they're emerging. And then my outer call to action is to, if you are a woman or women identified, to come and join one of our retreats and to experiencing this space of like, how do we welcome all of ourselves? And if you want to learn how to grow food, then join Earthed. And there's so many amazing courses that can support people how to do that. Yeah.
How would you like our friends listening to connect with you?
So you can do this by going to www.truenature.org.uk to find out about mine and Gaia's women's work on Dartmoor. Or you can go to www.earthed.co to find out about the organisation that I work with on ecosystem restoration. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Alana Blooms, and I share lots about my relationship with the natural world. So you can get in touch there as well.
Amazing. I am really feeling the aliveness of the more than human world in the space. We right now have the sun suddenly blaring down on us, whilst we can also hear the patter of the rain, and perhaps in a moment we'll be blessed with a rainbow. And I'm feeling the aliveness of your altar and the different beautiful sacred objects that are here. And Shambo, my sweet companion, has been sat at your feet as we've been sat here on the floor together, and he's been doing the shaking that he does when he dreams. And that also feels like it's been adding into the web of this sharing that we're having. So thank you, Alana, for you and everything you brought to the conversation, and the more than humanness that we are currently surrounded in, bathed in, experiencing.
Thank you so much, Amisha. It's been such a joy.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors, and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.